The deck was silent. The officers were not asleep. They were watching. Something moved through the open water alongside the ship, steady, unhurried, keeping exact pace with the sails. It had a head. It had dark hair. It moved nothing like a seal. On the 6th of August, 1830, the crew of HMS Daedalus reported what they saw to the Admiralty. The report was signed. It was published in full. It was never officially explained. What creature matches no known species yet persuades an entire crew of experienced naval officers? The HMS Daedalus cut through the South Atlantic on a windless afternoon, its 3 masts fully rigged and straining. The frigate carried 297 men, bound from the Cape of Good Hope toward the coast of St. Helena. Captain Peter McCuhay stood at the quarterdeck, glass in hand, reading the horizon as he had done for 20 years. It was past 5 in the afternoon when the officer of the watch called out, pointing sharply toward the port bow. Something was moving in the water at a distance of roughly 200 yards from the ship's hull. It was not diving. It was not surfacing. It maintained a straight course, parallel to the Daedalus, at consistent speed. McCuhay raised his telescope. The head was visible above the waterline, dark and rounded, resembling the shape of a human skull. Behind the head, a long neck extended, and behind that, a body that stretched well beyond what any known fish would show. The creature's back was dark brown. Its underside appeared yellowish white where the water occasionally broke against it. No fins were visible above the surface. No tail broke the water in the manner of any whale or known porpoise. The creature did not react to the ship. It did not change speed. It did not turn toward or away from the hull. Lieutenant Edgar Drummond joined McCuhay at the rail. Both men watched in complete silence for the first full minute. Drummond later wrote that the creature held its head consistently above the water, fixed forward as if watching its own course. The mane, or what appeared to be a mane, lay dark and flat against the neck, pressed wet and matted by the sea. 3 more officers were called to the deck, and each was handed a telescope without being told what to look for. Each man identified the same features independently: an elevated head, an elongated neck, dark coloring, and steady forward motion. The Daedalus was a warship, and her officers were trained to observe, to report, and to remain precise under pressure. McCuhay had commanded vessels in the Mediterranean and along the African coast for 2 decades, and was not a man of excess. The creature remained visible for approximately 5 full minutes before it drew ahead of the ship and vanished into the swell. No one on deck screamed. No one ran. The officers exchanged brief glances and returned to their stations without a word. That evening, McCuhay wrote the first draft of what would become a formal report addressed to the British Admiralty. He described the creature's length as no less than 60 feet, based on what he could estimate of the visible portion. He noted it passed close enough that, had it been a man overboard, the crew could have thrown him a rescue line. The logbook entry for the 6th of August, 1830, recorded the sighting in plain language and standard naval format. Below the entry, Drummond added a single line. The creature had neither the shape nor the movement of any known marine animal. By the time the Daedalus reached St. Helena, every officer who had been on deck that afternoon had confirmed the account. None of them had compared notes before writing their individual statements. Every description matched in every significant detail. The formal report was submitted to the Admiralty in October, 2 months after the sighting, without alteration or retraction of any kind. Within weeks, the full text of the report appeared in the Times of London, attributed by name to Captain Peter McCuhay. The city read it over breakfast. Scientists read it in their offices. And the questions that followed were not quiet ones. The letter from the Admiralty arrived at the offices of the Times 3 days after the story had already spread across London. It did not deny the report. It did not retract McCuhay's account. It simply noted that the matter was under review. Professor Richard Owen read the report from his desk at the Royal College of Surgeons, a dissection chart open beside him. Owen was the foremost comparative anatomist in Britain and had formally described more new species than any living scientist. He wrote back to the Times within the week, and his letter was careful, measured, and entirely dismissive of McQuay. Owen argued the creature was almost certainly a large seal, possibly a sea elephant, seen at distance under misleading conditions. He cited the angle of observation, the movement of the water, and the optical distortions common to nautical observation at speed. McQuay replied in print. His letter was short and direct. He had used a telescope at 200 yards in clear light. He had observed the creature for 5 uninterrupted minutes. He had not been alone. He had not been under stress. The exchange in the Times ran across 4 editions through November of 1830, drawing responses from across the scientific world. A zoologist from Edinburgh wrote that no known seal species could produce the silhouette described by multiple independent observers. A naval surgeon submitted a diagram based on the officer's descriptions, showing a neck-to-body ratio incompatible with any pinniped. Owen did not revise his position. He added instead a new argument: mass suggestion among sailors prone to superstition at sea. McQuay's response to the suggestion of superstition was read aloud at a meeting of the Royal Geographical Society in December. He listed the ranks and years of service of every officer who had signed the report. None had fewer than 12 years at sea. The Admiralty file on the Daedalus sighting was formally closed in January of 1831 without a finding of any kind. No species was named. No explanation was accepted. The file was shelved between 2 unrelated reports on navigation charts. A clerk's notation on the cover read, "Sighting unverified, no physical evidence, case considered closed by default." The notation was initialed but unsigned. It is not clear who authorized the closure or on whose instruction it was made. Back in Portsmouth, McQuay received his next command without delay. His service record showed no mark against the Daedalus report. Drummond was promoted to commander the following year. The other officers who had signed the report continued their careers without incident. None of them ever publicly withdrew their account. None of them amended their statements in any subsequent correspondence. In private letters, Drummond referred to the creature twice more, once in 1833 and once in 1841. Both references were brief. In the first, he wrote that he still saw it clearly when he closed his eyes at night. The second letter contained only a single sentence about the matter: "Some things do not require belief to remain true." By 1850, the Daedalus sighting had become a standard reference in debates on unknown marine fauna across Europe. It appeared in 3 separate scientific publications and was cited in a French naval journal on anomalous ocean observations. Each citation noted the same fact: the report had never been retracted, and no satisfactory biological explanation had been offered. Owen's sea elephant hypothesis remained the dominant official position, despite never being formally endorsed by the Admiralty itself. In the archive room of the Royal Geographical Society, the original diagram drawn from the officers' descriptions had quietly disappeared. The reading room of the British Museum kept a folder on anomalous marine sightings that had never been catalogued under any species. The Daedalus file was third from the top, behind 2 earlier cases from the North Atlantic that had also gone unresolved. A naturalist named Gosser had been working through the folder since the winter of 1855, taking notes in a small ledger. Philip Henry Gosser was not a fringe figure. He held a fellowship and had published standard works on marine invertebrates. He was also a man who believed the ocean still held creatures that science had not yet named or examined. Gosser compared the Daedalus description against every known large marine animal documented in British and European natural history records. The sea elephant reached lengths of up to 20 feet. The creature described by McQuay was estimated at 60 feet minimum. The oarfish could reach 30 feet in length, but lay flat in the water and could not hold its head aloft. The giant squid, known from fragmentary remains, had no elongated neck and no dark mane visible above the waterline. Goss published his analysis in 1856 under the title On the Existence of a Great Unknown Pelagic Creature. He proposed the creature belonged to an order of reptiles believed extinct since the Cretaceous period, still surviving in deep ocean. The proposal was dismissed almost immediately by Owen and his colleagues as speculation unsupported by any physical specimen or remains. Gosse responded that the fossil record of living ocean fauna was itself fragmentary, and absence of specimen was not proof of absence. The argument between the two men continued in letters and in print for nearly 3 years without resolution of any kind. In the meantime, 3 separate ships reported similar observations in the years between 1830 and 1856. The crew of the brigantine Pauline reported a creature matching the Daedalus description in the South Atlantic in 1875. The Pauline's captain, George Drevar, submitted a signed report to Lloyd's of London, where it was formally received and filed. Drevar's account included a detail absent from Macquay's. The creature he observed appeared to coil around a large sperm whale. The whale did not surface again. Drevar noted the time of the incident as approximately 15 minutes from first sighting to end. Lloyd's filed Drevar's report under anomalous marine incidents. It was never publicly released during his lifetime or the following decade. When the Pauline report finally appeared in a naturalist journal in 1877, it was treated as an isolated incident. No one cross-referenced it against the Daedalus file in the Admiralty archive or the British Museum reading room folder. The two reports described creatures of similar size, similar colouring, and similar behaviour. Surface transit without apparent distress. Both captains were experienced officers. Both submitted formal signed documents. Neither report was ever officially investigated by any authority. Back in London, Goss died in 1888 without having identified the creature or produced a specimen of any kind. His notes on the Daedalus sighting filled 11 pages of the ledger found among his papers after his death. The ledger was donated to the Natural History Museum, where it was placed in storage and not examined for 40 years. By the end of the 19th century, the Daedalus sighting had been quietly reclassified by most institutions as a case of misidentification. The word misidentification appeared in no formal ruling. It appeared instead in footnotes, in parentheses, in passing references, in survey texts. And Goss's ledger, the 11 pages on the Daedalus, had not been recorded in any museum accession register since his death. The Natural History Museum opened its new marine gallery in 1902 with glass cases lining every wall. Preserved specimens of deep-sea creatures floated in large jars of formaldehyde, oarfish, gulper eels, fangtooth fish, ribbonfish. A curator named Harold Wentworth had been tasked with cataloguing the unclaimed donations stored in the basement archive. Goss's ledger arrived on Wentworth's desk in 1906, still tied with the original string from 1888. Wentworth read the 11 pages on the Daedalus sighting in a single afternoon, then read them again the following morning. He wrote a memo to the museum director. The Goss notes contained references to measurements and behavioural details, not in any published account. The director replied in 3 lines. The ledger was to be catalogued as private papers, not as scientific evidence. It was assigned a reference number, placed in an acid-free box, and moved to the closed collection on the 4th floor. Wentworth was transferred to the invertebrate division the following month. His memo was not retained in the correspondence file. In 1912, a separate incident drew brief attention back to the Daedalus case in the British press. A passenger aboard a commercial steamer crossing from Cape Town reported a large creature surfacing briefly off the port quarter. The description matched: dark colouring, elevated head, no visible dorsal fin, moving in a straight line without apparent effort. The steamer's captain dismissed the report in his log as probable misidentification of a large basking shark or floating debris. No formal inquiry was opened. The passenger's written account was accepted by the shipping company and filed without further action. A journalist at the Illustrated London News attempted to connect the steamer sighting to the 1830 Daedalus report. His editor declined to run the piece. A note on the rejected draft read, "Insufficient basis for scientific comparison." 3 weeks later, the same editor published a 2-page feature on recent fossil discoveries in Argentina. No connection was drawn. The Admiralty archive had by then been partially reorganized. Several files from the 1830s were moved to a secondary location. The Daedalus file survived the reorganization intact. The clerk's unsigned notation remained on the cover exactly as written. In 1921, a researcher at University College London requested access to the file for a thesis on naval observation records. Access was granted. The researcher spent 2 days with the file and noted in her thesis that the original signatures were intact. She also noted a second sheet, clipped behind McCoue's report, that had not been referenced in any published account of the case. The second sheet was a brief addendum in a different hand, undated, describing the creature's eye as visible above the waterline. The addendum stated the eye was large, dark, and, in the writer's phrasing, appeared to register the presence of the ship. The researcher included the addendum in a footnote. Her thesis was accepted, bound, and placed in the university library's restricted section. No other scholar cited the footnote for the next 30 years. The addendum itself was not photographed or transcribed elsewhere. By 1950, the restricted section of the library had been partially damaged by wartime water infiltration from a burst pipe. Several bound theses were affected. The researcher's work survived, but the pages containing the footnote were warped and partially illegible. A librarian noted the damage in the condition log. No restoration was attempted. The entry read, "Minor loss, non-critical materials." The Admiralty file, however, remained dry and intact, locked in a cabinet that had not been opened since 1943. The cabinet in the Admiralty sub-archive was opened in 1958 by a junior archivist conducting a routine condition survey. The Daedalus file was the 7th item he checked. The cover notation was still legible, the original signatures entirely undamaged. He photographed the file with a standard issue Admiralty camera, the kind used for document preservation in coastal command offices. The photographs were developed, numbered, and filed in a separate envelope clipped to the exterior of the original folder. A copy of the photographs was sent to the Naval Historical Branch at Portsmouth, where they were received and formally acknowledged. The acknowledgement letter noted the photographs had been logged under miscellaneous Victorian-era naval incidents, in reference Category 7. Category 7 contained no index. Files within it were retrievable only if the researcher already knew the exact case name. In 1962, a zoologist named Dr. Bernard Heuvelmans published a systematic study of unidentified marine animal reports. His book cited the Daedalus case in full and proposed a taxonomy of unknown large marine animals based on recurring physical descriptions. Heuvelmans identified 9 distinct morphological types drawn from 3 centuries of naval and maritime records across multiple countries. The Daedalus creature fit his category of long-necked type. Elevated head, narrow neck, dark dorsal coloring, non-cetacean locomotion. He noted that at least 8 separate credible reports from the South Atlantic described animals matching this morphology since 1830. The book was reviewed in scientific journals. Most reviews acknowledged the quality of the research while rejecting the core hypothesis. One reviewer in a London natural history journal wrote, "The evidence is more consistent than the field would like to admit." That sentence was not quoted in any subsequent review. It appeared once in a journal with limited circulation and was not repeated. At the Natural History Museum, Gosse's ledger was finally examined in full in 1965 by a graduate student in ichthyology. The student found the 11 pages on the Daedalus sighting and noted 3 measurements Gosse had calculated from the officer's statements. Gosse had estimated the creature's neck alone at approximately 15 feet based on the proportion described relative to the body. No known living species had a neck of that length and that diameter combined with a body capable of sustained surface travel. The student included the Goss measurements in an appendix to his dissertation, flagged as historically significant but scientifically inconclusive. His dissertation was published in condensed form the following year. The appendix containing the measurements was cut by the journal editor. The full measurements Goss had calculated were therefore never entered into any published scientific record in any surviving form. At the Admiralty, the photographic envelope clipped to the Daedalus file was separated from the original folder during a second reorganization. The photographs were placed in a general image archive. The original folder remained in Category 7 without its photographic record attached. By 1970, the two components of the file, original documents and photographs, were stored in entirely separate buildings. A request to reunite them was made in writing by the Naval Historical Branch in 1972. It was not acted upon. The request letter remained in an outgoing correspondence file at Portsmouth, awaiting a response that was never sent or recorded. In 1979, a fire in a storage annex destroyed several boxes of Victorian-era naval miscellany filed under Category 7. The Daedalus folder was not among them, but 14 files adjacent to it in the cabinet were reduced to unreadable ash. The archivist's damage report listed the losses by reference number only. None of the destroyed files had been digitized or copied. The fire damage report was filed and forgotten. The Daedalus folder sat undisturbed in its cabinet for another 6 years. In 1985, a researcher from the National Maritime Museum in Greenwich submitted a formal access request to the Admiralty archive. She was studying patterns in Victorian naval reporting and had listed 12 case files she wished to examine, including the Daedalus. The file was located after 3 days of search. The photographic envelope was not found. The archivist noted its absence in writing. The researcher examined Makuhe's original report under a magnifying glass, checking the ink and paper for signs of later amendment. The signatures were original, the ink was consistent throughout. There was no evidence of addition, erasure, or alteration of any kind. The undated addendum describing the creature's eye, the one noted by the 1921 researcher, was still clipped to the back. The handwriting in the addendum did not match Makuhe's. It did not match Drummond's, whose letters she had examined at Portsmouth. She photographed the addendum herself, noted the handwriting discrepancy in her field notebook, and submitted a query to the Admiralty Records Office. The Records Office replied 6 weeks later. The addendum's authorship was unknown. No register of contributors to the file existed. Her published paper on Victorian naval reporting appeared in 1987 and included a section on the Daedalus case. The addendum was reproduced in full for the first time in any published work, accompanied by a note on the unidentified hand. The paper generated more correspondence than any other she had published. Most of it came not from historians, but from zoologists. Several wrote to ask whether the original addendum could be submitted for handwriting analysis against known naval personnel from the period. The Admiralty Records Office declined the request. The file was classified as closed historical record, not subject to forensic examination. The addendum therefore remained attributable to no one, written by an unknown hand, attached to a signed report, and officially ignored. What the addendum described, in plain and unelaborated language, was a creature that had looked back at the men who watched it. That detail, the eye registering the ship, had never appeared in Makuhe's formal report or in Drummond's private letters. On the 6th of August, 1830, the HMS Daedalus was sailing northeast through the South Atlantic at roughly 8 knots. At approximately 5 in the afternoon, an unidentified creature appeared at the surface 200 yards off the port beam. It remained visible for 5 minutes. 6 officers observed it independently. All 6 described the same physical features in separate statements. The most consistent explanation offered in the decades that followed was a large marine animal misidentified under conditions of partial visibility. But the conditions that day were not partial. Makuhe recorded calm seas, good light. and an observation distance of 200 yards. The oarfish hypothesis accounts for length but not for the elevated head, the apparent neck, or the mane visible above the waterline. The sea elephant hypothesis accounts for body mass, but produces a silhouette entirely unlike what 6 trained observers independently drew. The most plausible biological candidate remains a large, unknown, long-necked marine animal, a species never formally collected or described. Its behavior, surface transit in daylight, indifference to the ship, steady directional movement, suggests a living animal, not a floating object. Mukwege's career was not damaged. No officer was disciplined. The Admiralty closed the file without endorsing any explanation at all. The Royal Society never formally investigated. The British Museum never committed resources. The report was absorbed into the archive and left there. Why did no British institution ever formally investigate a signed, unretracted naval report?